here's a question for you, and I don't even know the answer to it, but we'll be getting Joe Ventre on in a second from Taxpayers Alliance. Have they actually got any trains that run on HS2? Have they got the trains? Are they still manufacturing the trains? I know they've built some track. I think they've built some track. I don't really know. Joe will know. He has the answer to all of these questions. Joe, very good morning to you.
Good morning, Mike. Good to speak to you.
Yeah, nice to have you on. It's an extraordinary story, this HS2. I mean, we've been getting some incredible pieces of information from people who are associated with companies working with them, or people who know people who work on the HS2 project. They seem to be pretty, shall we say, unrestricted in the way that they throw the money around, and people are claiming that, you know, their company charges 3 times what they would be paid normally, and it gets paid no problem at all. People sitting around doing nothing because there's literally nothing to do. We found out today that there's loads of people on 6-figure salaries doing God knows what. There isn't really anything to do. And I mean, do you happen to know the answer to the question, have they got any trains?
Frankly, I don't, but I think it seems like trains are lower down their list of priorities if you look at what's been going on at the corporation. I mean, you know, it seems to be all about, you know, 6-figure salaries and these woke HR lessons and all these sorts of things. I think trains and train services seem to be way down the list of priorities.
Yeah, exactly right. And it's incredible to see quite how much eye-watering salaries are being paid to some of these people. I mean, you know, 250,000 here, 300,000 there, and phase 1, which is sort of supposedly nearly complete to Birmingham, is only really a third of what they were planning to do. So if it's going to end up costing 180 billion quid, I mean, that's just ridiculous, isn't it?
It's absolutely ludicrous, Mike. You know, I think it's no secret at this point now that HS2 has completely fallen apart. I mean, we've seen the government's own body, the Infrastructure and Projects Authority, deem the entire project now to be unachievable. You know, that's the government's own body speaking at this point. We know that, you know, somewhere in the region of between 20 and 30 billion pounds has already been sunk into the project, with even more committed contractually. And I think what we all feel, you know, as taxpayers, when we see these huge salaries going to these people, it just adds insult to injury. I mean, in a lot of cases, it just feels like we're rewarding failure, and it just feels, you know, like I just feel like, why won't the Prime Minister have the guts at this point to pull the plug on this thing entirely and end this national embarrassment?
Yeah, exactly right. But, I mean, where does it leave us, though? Because if they do, like, pull the plug on this kind of project, I imagine that the contractors will all be laughing all the way to the bank, because they'll be getting paid for not having to finish the thing at all. And presumably they'll have all sorts of, you know, locked-in clauses that say that if the government pulls out of certain parts of it, that they must be paid the full amount and all the rest of it. So, I mean, it's the taxpayer, once again, sadly, that's getting the rough end of the deal, isn't it?
Well, this is the sad thing, Mike, as you say, you know, even if the Prime Minister were now to pull the plug on the thing and call it all quits, it wouldn't be like there wouldn't be more money to commit to this, sadly. The concern that I have, though, really, is if we just plough ahead with this project and say, yep, you know, we're already 20 or 30 billion pounds in, that we're going to end up falling for the sunk cost fallacy. I mean, we're seeing some projections saying that this project in its entirety could end up costing 180 billion pounds. So there is potentially a lot more money that could be lost here, and I think what the government needs to do really is just have the, you know, have the nerve to sort of look at this again and really, you know, be able to commit the money that that needs to be sort of deserved by taxpayers. And, you know, I think a lot of these things could be repurposed, frankly. We're seeing industry leaders saying these sorts of things, that these, you know, the tunnels that could be built, the infrastructure that's already there could be repurposed for other things. So it's not to say that the project could be entirely lost, but I think not falling for that sunk cost fallacy and sinking more and more money into this is the priority that needs to be looked at.
It certainly would appear that, you know, from what people in the north of the country are saying, you know, the money would have been a lot better spent just connecting more of the northern cities to each other rather than worrying about connecting them all to Birmingham.
Well, this is it, you know, the Taxpayers Alliance, we go around the country quite a lot talking to people about their concerns. Yeah. And what we've found consistently through the entirety of HS2 is that people don't want this grand train that runs to London and, you know, shaves half an hour off that journey. What they want to see is their local infrastructure improved. You know, much less grandiose projects for politicians to lord over, but real services that matter to people and to sort of interconnect those towns in parts of our regions. I mean, what we previously found was that for the projected cost at the time, which I believe was around £50 billion, you could have completed around 28 other different infrastructure projects around the country, which would have really mattered to people. Right. So you think that's still a possibility now that the government could and should be looking at?
And one of the things that was said yesterday was that Rishi Sunak was appalled and incredibly surprised to see how much profligate that the executives of HS2 had been with public money. But I was told as well that actually they can't pay for anything, they can't sign off anything without it getting double-checked by the Treasury. So I don't think it should have been a surprise to Rishi Sunak that they were spending money the way they have been. He should have been on top of that from the beginning, shouldn't he?
Well, absolutely. I think he's the last person to be surprised, Mike. You know, we've been seeing this for years, the way that money's been shoveled out the door with these huge salaries, you know, massive contractual fees, which frankly you just wouldn't see in the private sector. And of course, I think one of the really shocking things to come out recently, of course, is these HR practices that have been pursued, these sort of mindless, woke projects that HS2 Limited have found themselves engaged in as the project has been going further and further down the tube. I mean, we're looking at things like in their recent diversity and inclusion report, you know, looking at the sexual orientations of their departments, looking at, you know, hitting targets for hiring less white people. I mean, you think this fundamentally is supposed to be a railway project.
Right.
This is supposed to be delivering a train line.
Right.
And yet they've got so far and far away from their objectives that this is where we're at. And we're looking at, you know, we're looking at a train line which we don't know where it's going to begin or where it's going to end. Right. It's ridiculous.
And so far we don't know if they've got any trains.
Yeah, exactly. All we know is that the shovel's in the ground. That's all we ever hear is the shovel's in the ground.
Absolutely extraordinary. Joe, thanks very much indeed. Joe Ventre there, Digital Campaign Manager at Taxpayers Alliance. It's extraordinary, isn't it? I mean, we can't seem to manage these projects very well. If they were building this in almost any other country in the world, it would be done by now. They started doing it like a decade ago, didn't they? Or maybe even longer. But yet we don't know if they've got any trains. We don't know when it's likely to be possible to travel on said train. We don't know how far the lines have gone. We don't know whether the lines have actually been made ready for train transportation, even if they only do go to Birmingham. We don't seem to have a clue as to when everything will be done. I mean, it's ridiculous. £180 billion later, what have they spent it on? What the hell are they doing? This is talkTV.